A gunshot tore open the desert night, echoing off the canyon walls before dissolving into nothing. A man pulled the blanket over his head and pretended he heard nothing. Though a mile away, a house was burning to the ground, with people who never made it out. 3 years later, the dust still clung to his boots. Some nights, the desert does not forget. It only waits for the wind to shift. Waits until a woman steps out of the shadows, a small leather pouch pressed against her chest. Inside it, names an entire territory has tried to bury for 7 years. 7 coyotes circle her in the dying light. She does not scream. She does not beg. She only lifts her head toward the bruised purple sky and decides whether she will give the wild things the satisfaction of her fear. By the time Samuel Hart rode into Silver Rock, Carver was already dead. The whole territory was about to learn why. That morning arrived quiet, the way mornings do after terrible things pass. The sky was pale and enormous, the color of old bone. Dust hung low over the main street, barely moving in the still air. People were gathering near the courthouse steps before the sun had fully risen. They gathered the way people do when something in the world has shifted. They could not yet say what had changed, but they felt it. A man appeared at the far end of the street, riding slow. His horse was exhausted, its head hanging low with every step. The man sat straight in the saddle. Despite everything his body had been through, his right arm was wrapped in cloth torn from his own shirt. The cloth was dark at the edges where the blood had dried overnight. He did not look at the people watching from doorways and windows. He looked straight ahead, the way a man looks after making his peace. Beside him, a young woman walked on her own feet. She did not ride, and she had not been made to walk. She walked because she had chosen to, and the difference was visible. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, her dark hair loose and tangled. Her wrists were wrapped in strips of cloth, but her spine was straight. She held her chin up, and her eyes moved over Silver Rock slowly. She took note of everything she saw. The way a hawk notes open ground. She was afraid of nothing, and the town could see that clearly. The people on the main street went quiet when they saw her. A child on the porch of the dry goods store stopped bouncing in a tin can. A woman in a doorway pulled her shawl tighter without knowing why. 2 men outside the saloon looked at each other and said nothing. That silence was the first sign that this morning was different from others. Samuel Hart guided his tired horse toward the center of the street. He did not hurry, and he did not slow down, and he did not stop. People stepped back from the edges of the boardwalk as he passed, not out of fear exactly, but out of something that felt like recognition, as if they understood without being told that this man had been somewhere difficult, and that whatever he was carrying had not been set down yet. The woman beside him moved with a kind of deliberate quiet. Each step she took on the packed dirt of the street was measured and certain. She looked at the courthouse at the end of the road and did not look away. In her hand she held a small pouch of worn leather tied with braided cord. She held it at her side, visible. Not hidden, not clutched to her chest. She carried it, the way you carry something you are done hiding. Samuel pulled his horse to a stop in front of the boarding house. He swung down slowly, favoring his wrapped arm, and stood in the street. He looked at the crowd that had gathered 20 feet away. He looked at them the way a man looks at a problem he has already decided to face. A boy near the front of the crowd stared at the woman beside Samuel. "Pa," the boy said quietly. "Who is she?" His father put a hand on the boy's shoulder and said nothing, because there was no short answer to that question, not one that would have meant anything yet. To understand that morning, you have to go back 3 days. You have to go back to the gulch below the eastern ridge. You have to go back to the desert at dusk when everything burns orange. You have to go back to the night the coyotes circled. And you have to go back to the moment Samuel Hart almost kept riding, because that moment, more than any shot fired or name spoken later, was where this story truly began. Morning arrived pale and cold, with hawks already in the air above the ridges. Samuel was up first. He checked the rifles, both of them, checked the pistols. He looked at the southern sky for smoke and the ridges for reflected light. Nothing he could see, but that feeling between his shoulders was still there. Eli got up without complaint, which meant he had slept well or not at all. Ayoka was awake before either of them, already feeding the horses dried grass. She moved through the early dark with the quiet efficiency he had grown used to, not hurrying, not wasting motion, every action doing exactly what it needed to do. She looked up when Samuel came to check the horses beside her. "South," she said. "We need to go south now. There is a road that cuts west. I know a way that avoids the canyon fork entirely. It's longer, but it's clear." Samuel considered this. "How far longer? Half a day," she said. "But the shorter road, we might not." He nodded. That was sufficient reasoning. They broke camp and rode south. The morning passed without incident, which Samuel did not trust. Silence on the desert was not always peace. Sometimes it was preparation. He kept one eye on the ridges, and one on the trail and one ear on Eli. Whippich was one eye and one ear more than he had available, strictly speaking. But you do what you can with what you have. That was a lesson the desert taught. Eli was quiet for most of the morning, which was unusual enough to note. The man was constitutionally inclined toward talking, toward filling silence. His quiet meant he was thinking, and his thinking meant he was calculating. Samuel did not like the arithmetic Eli was likely running. Around midday, they stopped beside a low rock that provided shade for the horses. Ayoka was checking the horses' legs when Eli came beside Samuel and sat. He spoke low, his eyes on the horizon rather than on Samuel's face. "You know what Carver offered you in that passage was the right offer," he said. Samuel looked at the distance. He did not answer immediately. "Walk away clean. Name Burns. Nobody knows. You go north, start over. That's what a sensible man would do." Sensible and alive are related things. She'd get taken eventually anyway. Carver's got too many men and too much time. You can't outrun what he's got backing him. Not just Carver. The men above him. Samuel turned his head and looked at Eli directly. "Say what you're saying." Eli met his eyes and said it plainly. "Hand her over. Walk away. Live longer." Samuel picked up the rifle. He checked the load, though it was fine. "You say that again," he said. "And you walk the rest of the way to Silver Rock, on foot, in the midday sun, with no canteen." "Those are the terms." Eli looked at him for a moment, then he looked away. "Just saying what's true, then stop," Samuel said. "What's true and what's right aren't always the same." Eli made a sound. Not agreement, not quite disagreement. Something in between. Akoka had heard all of this. She came and stood beside Samuel without comment. She looked at Eli, with that level and unembellished gaze she carried so naturally. "Men who measure worth by survival," she said. "Measure everything too small." Eli had no answer for that. He went back to his horse and didn't talk for an hour. They were within 2 hours of Silver Rock when Samuel spotted the dust. Not ahead, behind them, and to the east, which meant they had been outmaneuvered. Carver had not covered the canyon fork. He had covered what came after it. He had let them come south and then swung east to cut them off from behind. Samuel pulled his horse up and looked at the dust cloud for a long moment. Counting, estimating. The dust was heavy. 6 horses at least, maybe more. "He's behind us," he said. Ayoka looked back and calculated in 2 seconds. 6 riders, moving fast. Eli had his hand on his pistol and his face was doing something complicated. Samuel looked at the terrain around them. The open country offered nothing. No cover, no height, no defensible position in any direction worth the name. Except ahead, where the land dipped into a shallow oyo lined with boulders. "There," Samuel said. "We go there and we make our stand in those boulders," Eli said. "That's suicide. There are 6 of them, and 3 of us. There are 3 of us and a truth. That 20 men couldn't keep quiet," Samuel said. He spurred the horse toward the depression without waiting for agreement. Apache behind without hesitation. After a moment, Eli followed. They rode hard for the boulders. As the dust cloud behind them grew and closed, they reached the shallow depression and pulled the horses in behind the boulders. Samuel dismounted fast and tied the reins to a root with 3 quick knots. He pulled brush and loose stone to the mouth of the depression with both hands. It wasn't much, but it would slow horses and force them on foot. Ayoka worked beside him without being asked. moving stones with her uninjured hand. Her wrists were raw under the cloth, but she did not favor them or stop. Ely covered the east approach, crouching behind the largest boulder with his pistols. His face had resolved into something steadier than it had been on the trail. When the mathematics become unavoidable, some men find a kind of calm in them. 6 riders, Ioka said again, from the edge of the depression. The center one is heavier. How can you tell from here? Ely asked, squinting at the approaching dust. The dust behind a heavy horse settles differently, she said simply. The center rider's dust drops faster. It doesn't carry as far in the wind. Ellie looked at her. That's Carver, he said. She's right. That's how he rides. Samuel leveled the rifle across the top of the stone barricade and waited. He waited the way the desert had taught him to wait, without moving, without waste. The dust cloud grew and resolved into shapes, and the shapes became men on horses. 6 of them, just as she had said, riding in a loose wedge with Carver at the center. Carver's long dark coat was visible at 200 yards, his hat, his posture. Even from that distance, the man had a particular way of sitting on a horse, a particular kind of certainty. The certainty of a man who has never doubted his arrival. He pulled up 50 yards out and let his men fan to the sides in silence. They knew their positions. This was not their first time doing this kind of work. Heart, Carver called. His voice was easy, no effort. The desert carried it cleanly. I know exactly which rock you're behind. I know which boulder Turner is using. I can see the girl from here. I've been able to see you for the last 20 minutes. He paused. Let that land. Come out. Let's end this between us, like we used to. Samuel did not come out. He kept the rifle leveled. Shy, you should have left it at ashes, Samuel called back. Carver laughed. It was a genuine sound, which made it worse. And miss this? No. You've got something of mine, and I've come to collect it. She's not yours, Samuel said. She never was. That right? Carver said. Interesting perspective from the man I taught. He raised his hand, and without another word, he dropped it. The riders came down at a canter, guns already drawn, not wasting motion. Samuel fired first. One controlled shot, and the lead rider went down hard. The man tumbled from the saddle and hit the dirt and did not get up. Eli's pistols opened up from behind the left boulder, fast and not careful. He hit nothing on the first 2 shots, but drove 2 riders wide of the center. A third rider pulled his horse sideways as the animal shied at the gunfire. Carver did not fire yet. He rode through the chaos like a man walking a known road. His revolver was in his hand, but he held it at his side. Not level, not aimed. He was watching, calculating, deciding where the moment would be clearest. Samuel fired again and caught a second rider in the shoulder, dropping him sideways. The man stayed in the saddle but reined away hard. Out of the fight for now. Ely hit one of the remaining riders on the third shot, a grazing hit on the arm. The man yelped and pulled back, and that left 3 horses between them and Carver. Ioka was behind the barricade, pressed against the stone, not showing herself. The pouch was against her chest, her hand flat over it, her breathing controlled. Dust and powder smoke filled the depression until the air tasted of it. Samuel reloaded by feel, his hands certain, his eyes on the shifting shapes. Carver dismounted 40 yards out and walked forward through the smoke on foot. He walked with his revolver level at his side, his eyes fixed on Samuel's position. Last chance, Hart, he called over the gunfire around him. He didn't shout it. He said it at a conversational volume, as though they were discussing something mild. Give me the girl in the pouch. Your name Burns. You walk out of here clean. Samuel rose from behind the barricade. He leveled a rifle at Carver's chest. You already know my answer, Samuel said. I do, Carver said. That's what makes it sad. He lunged, not at Samuel. He went sideways in 2 fast steps and then he went for Ioka. He was faster than his size suggested. He always had been. Samuel had known this. He knew it, and he was still a half second behind the man's movement. Carver's hand closed on Ioka's arm and he yanked her forward and around. His back went to the canyon wall, and she was between him and Samuel's rifle. The revolver came up against her temple. The clearing went silent. Samuel held the rifle. His sight line was clear above the shoulder. But the shoulder was not what he needed, and the distance was not what he needed. He held it and waited and measured, everything he had available to measure. Carver's chest was heaving, but his gun hand was completely still. "Put it down, Hart," Carver said. "You cannot make this shot and you know it. Let her go. That is not going to happen." The revolver pressed harder. She did not flinch. She stood straight in his grip, and her eyes found Samuel's across the smoke. Her eyes were clear, completely without panic. Completely without pleading. They asked nothing. They only looked at him, steady and present and certain. "I waited in Abilene." Carver said it did. "Is that what you think?" That I hesitated. "I wait because I enjoy waiting. That's what you never understood about me. You always thought I was you, Hart. But I'm not. I never was." His finger moved toward the trigger. The shot came from the left. Ellie Turner. From behind the boulder, with a hand that had been shaking all morning. One shot. It caught Carver in the right shoulder and spun him half around. Ayoka pulled free in the same instant. Stepping back and to the side cleanly, Samuel did not hesitate. He had been waiting for this exact opening. The shot was true. He knew it before the rifle spoke, the way you sometimes know. Carver went to his knees. His revolver fell from his hand and hit the dirt. His right hand came up toward his chest and found what the bullet had done. His pale eyes went wide, and then something moved through them. That was not rage, not fear, exactly. Something more confused than fear, something like disbelief. The disbelief of a man who has believed completely in a world that has just ended. He fell forward. The dust rose around him and then settled. The canyon was absolutely silent for 3 full seconds. Carver's remaining riders looked at each other. Then at the body, then at Ayoka. She was standing in the open, the pouch in her hand, with her eyes level, her spine straight. One rider turned his horse and rode. Then another. Then the third. No one told them to. They simply looked at what was in front of them and chose. Samuel lowered the rifle. The shaking in his arms came and he let it come. He walked to Ayoka and stood beside her and looked at Carver's still form. She was looking at the man with an expression that was harder to name than grief. The way you look at the end of a long illness, when relief and grief are tangled. "You all right?" Samuel said. "Yes," she said. Illy came out from behind the boulder. He was looking at his own hand, the hand that had held the pistol. He was looking at it like it was unfamiliar. "I don't know how I made that shot," he said. "Fear makes people accurate sometimes," Samuel said. "God help us all," Eli said. He holstered the pistol carefully. "We actually did it." Ayoka was looking at Carver. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said quietly to the space between herself and the body, "You could have chosen different." She was not speaking to anyone in the depression. She was speaking to the fact of him. "Most men can," she said. She picked up the pouch from where it had fallen and tied the cord and held it. She looked at Samuel. "It is not done," she said. "No," he said. "Carver is one man. The names in this pouch are still alive, I know." She looked at the southern sky, where Silver Rock was waiting. They buried Carver in the canyon, unmarked. The desert would do the rest. Ellie helped without commenting on it, which was the most respectful thing he could do. They worked in silence, and when it was done, they stood for a moment and said nothing. There was nothing to say. Men like Carver did not deserve speeches. Dust was enough. Ellie picked up his hat from the ground, where he had set it, and put it back on. He looked at the mound of sand and gravel that now covered the man. "I pointed a family out to him once," Eli said. He said it to the ground. Samuel had been waiting for this. He said nothing. Let it come in its own time. 3 years back, they were Apache. North of here, maybe a day's hard ride. He asked me if I knew of a gun who had land. They were holding on to stubbornly. I told him about that family. I'd seen them. Seemed like they'd resist. He stopped. He was quiet for a count of 10. Then, they burned that night. Ayoka stood across the grave from Eli. She did not move, did not speak. "I don't know," Eli said, his voice going slightly rougher. "If that was your kin," he said it to the ground. He could not bring himself to say it to her face. Ayoka looked at him for a long time. The silence between them was its own language. Then she turned and walked to her horse, and began checking the saddle and the girth. She did not look back at Eli. She did not respond in any word or gesture. And that silence was heavier and more complete than anything she could have said. Ellie stood there, looking at the side of her back for a moment. Then he picked up his rifle and walked to his own horse without speaking further. Samuel caught his eye for a moment. Eli looked away. The arithmetic had landed. Some things you carry, some things you put down when you find a grave that's open. Eli had found one and put something in it and covered it over. Whether that helped or not was not Samuel's business to decide. They rode south through the afternoon, the sky going from blue to orange to purple. The light in that last hour before dark does something particular to the desert. It turns the ordinary into something worth looking at twice. Gold on everything. Samuel rode alongside Ayoka in silence for most of the ride. She did not speak, and he did not press. She was carrying something heavy, not the pouch, though she carried that too. Something heavier than leather and paper. After a while, he said, simply, "He may not have been your kin." She looked at the horizon. "He may have been," she said, a pause. "Either way, it changes nothing about what needs to be done." He nodded. "No, it doesn't." She looked at him sidelong. "You said something true in that passage," she said. He waited. He was not sure what she was referring to. "You said what is true and what is right are not always the same thing." She looked back at the horizon. "That is worth remembering," she said. He thought about $40. About his name on the third page. "Yes," he said. "It is." The stars came out one at a time and then all at once, as they always did. The desert cooled around them, and the horse's breath began to show faint in the air. Silver Rock was 3 hours south. They would arrive before the town was asleep. They rode on. The land was quiet. The sky was enormous and very clear. They stopped once more, an hour north of Silver Rock, to rest the horses. Samuel built no fire, too close to the town, too close to whatever waited there. They sat in the dark with the stars above them, and the horses standing easy. After a while, Ayoka said, "Tell me about the woman in Abilene." Samuel was quiet. He had been waiting for this question too. "The one who didn't make it out of the house," she said. Not harsh, just direct. He leaned back against the rock. He looked at the stars. He told her, not the compressed version he had given before, the full weight of it, 3 years ago. Carver's outfit, the night before the job. Carver told him about the family and what he intended. Samuel had been clear. "I wasn't going to ride with him," Samuel said. "I had already decided that. I told him I was done with that kind of work." He didn't argue. He said, "Fair enough. Take your last pay and ride. No hard feelings. Fess." I took the money. I got on my horse. I rode north. He stopped. The silence held for a moment. "At about midnight, I heard the shots," he said, "from a mile away. Maybe more. I was in the boarding house. I heard them through the window, and I pulled the blanket up," he said. "And I went back to sleep." He said it flat. He did not soften it with explanation or context or intent. In the morning, there was smoke from that direction. I didn't ride. To look, I settled my bill and rode out of Abilene, and I didn't look back. The night was very quiet around them. "The woman," he said. "I didn't know her name. I didn't know the family. I knew where they lived, because Carver had described them the night before. I knew what was going to happen to them. And I chose not to know any more than that." He stopped. That was all of it. Ayoka said nothing for a long moment. The kind of nothing that is not empty. "You came back tonight," she said. "To the gulch. You turned your horse around." "Yes. Why?" He thought about it. He wanted to give her the honest answer, not the easy one. "Because I'd been carrying Abilene for 3 years," he said. "And I was tired, not of carrying it. Of using it as a reason to keep going past things that needed someone to stop." She was quiet. He could hear her breathing, slow and measured in the dark. "That's not enough to make it right," she said. "No, it's not, but it's something," she said. And she said it carefully, without giving it more weight than it had. He nodded, even though she could not see him nodding in the dark. They sat for a while longer. Then she stood and said, "We should move. Silver Rock is waiting." And they mounted and rode south under the full and brilliant desert sky. Silver Rock came up gradually, the way towns do in flat country. First the smell of it, smoke from fires, and the particular smell of people. Then lights, low and scattered, in windows and on porches. Then the shapes of buildings against the stars. Then the buildings themselves. They came in from the north, on a road that was little more than a tire track. The town's main street was quiet at this hour, but not entirely asleep. A man on a porch with a lamp. A woman at a window. A dog somewhere. Samuel led them to a narrow white building on the south side of the street. The sign above the door read Webb's, and what else it said was too faded to read. He dismounted and knocked twice, the way he remembered was expected here. A pause. A light behind the frosted glass panel. Then the door opened. The woman who stood there was small, her hair pinned back neatly. Her face was the kind of face that had held more than it showed for a long time. She looked at Samuel and then at Ayoka, and something moved in her expression. It was not surprise. It was more like confirmation of something long expected. "You look like her," the woman said. Her voice was soft and careful, very much like her. Ayoka went still. "You knew my mother. She passed through here," Clara Webb said. "It's been years now. A long time. She left something with me. In case someone came looking." She stepped back. "Come inside. All of you. Come inside where the light is." The front room of Clara Webb's boarding house was small and clean and warm. She had a fire going in the stove, low but sufficient, and the room smelled of it. She set out cups on the table without asking, and poured coffee into each one. Then she went behind a loose board in the wall, near the back window. She came back with a flat, tin box and set it on the table in front of Ayoka. Inside the box, folded and tied with plain string, was an envelope. On the front, in careful and deliberate handwriting, a single word, Ayoka. Ayoka looked at it for a long moment without touching it. Then she picked it up with both hands. She looked at it the way you look at something you have waited a long time for, uncertain whether you are ready. "Give me a few minutes," she said. Clara showed her to the small room at the back of the house. Ayoka went in and closed the door. Samuel sat across from him. Clara sat near the stove. Nobody spoke. They drank their coffee. The fire in the stove crackled softly. Clara looked at her hands on the table. Samuel looked at the closed door. Ely looked at his coffee cup, which was easier than looking at either of them. After a while, Clara said quietly, "To the table." "My husband is in there, too." Samuel looked at her. She kept her eyes on her own hands, his name in that pouch. He signed as a witness to one of the agreements. She paused. He didn't know what he was witnessing. He thought it was land survey. Samuel said nothing. He kept his expression still. "He found out what he had signed 6 months later," Clara said. "He never recovered from it." She did not explain further what she meant by that. She did not need to. "I've known for 3 years," she said. "About what was in that pouch. About Nashota. About why she came through here and what she left with me. I've been waiting," she said, "for whoever came for it." She looked at the closed door. "I'm glad it was her," she said. Simply, the door opened after 15 minutes. Ayoka came out. Her eyes were dry. Her face was clear. Her posture was what it always was. Whatever the letter had cost her, she had paid in that small room, and she was done. She stood in the doorway and looked at Samuel directly. "My mother wrote that my father was threatened," she said. "His family or his land. He was not a weak man. But they found the place where he was not strong enough." She came to the table and sat down. "She forgave him," she said. "My mother," a pause. "She wrote that she did not want me to." She looked at the pouch on the table in front of her. She said, "Forgiveness is yours, but the truth is not. The truth belongs to everyone who lost something because of it." She picked up the pouch. She looked at Samuel. "Are you ready?" "Yes," he said. She looked at Clara. "Will you stand with me?" Clara Webb looked at the pouch. Then she looked at Ayoka. "Yes," she said. "I will." She said it simply with the weight of something that had been decided a long time ago, just waiting for the moment to say it out loud. Morning came to Silver Rock with the particular quality of an important day. The light was clean and hard. The air had an edge to it, sharp as new metal. By the time Samuel and Ayoka came out of Clara's boarding house, people were gathering. Word moves fast in small towns. It moves the way water moves through cracks, finding every available space, quiet and unstoppable, and entirely without permission. The main street was half full before the sun had cleared the eastern ridge. People came from the saloon, the dry goods store, the livery stable at the far end. They came from the side streets and the houses that backed onto the creek. They came with the particular posture of people who have been waiting for something, not knowing what they were waiting for until it was already in front of them. Fan, Aldridge appeared at the top of the courthouse steps at 8 o'clock. He was a tall man, well-dressed in the manner of men who profit from seeming trustworthy. His face was arranged in an expression of measured and practiced concern. He had the look of a man who had received word in the early hours and dressed accordingly. He came down the steps and met them in the middle of the square. He had his hands open, his voice pitched low and steady and reasonable. "Miss," he said, looking at Ioka. "Mr. Hart, perhaps we might speak privately." He searched for a word. Before anything precipitous occurs, Ioka looked at him. She did not slow her pace. "No," she said. She walked past him. He turned and walked across the square toward the courthouse steps. Then he looked at Samuel. Samuel looked back at him. "Judge," Samuel said. Aldridge's expression shifted fractionally. "This will not go the way you think." "Maybe not," Samuel said. "But it's going." He followed Ioka across the square. The square was full. By the time Ioka reached the courthouse steps, not a crowd that had been assembled or directed, a crowd that had arrived on its own. The way a crowd arrives when it feels that something true is about to happen. She climbed 3 steps and turned. She looked at the people below her. She did not raise her voice. She did not begin with explanation or apology. She opened the pouch. She took out the papers. She found the first page. She read the first name, a man in the front of the crowd, standing close, well-dressed, prosperous. He went absolutely still when he heard his name. Then he turned to leave, moving toward the edge of the crowd. 3 people stepped into his path without coordination or communication. They did not touch him. They simply filled the space between him and away. He stopped. He looked at the faces around him. He did not move again. Ioka read the second name, then the third, then the fourth. Each name landed in the square like a stone dropped from a height. Each one took a moment to reach the bottom. Then it was there, unmovable. At the fourth name, a woman near the back of the crowd began to cry, not loudly. Just steadily, the way you cry when something you suspected is confirmed. At the 5th name, 2 men looked at each other with the look of men who have shared a secret. The secret was now no longer theirs. That look was the look of losing something. Aldridge moved on the 6th name. He came up the steps behind Ioka, his hand going inside his coat. Samuel was there before the hand completed its movement. He put himself between Aldridge and Ioka. He did not touch the judge. He did not raise the rifle. He did not speak. He simply stood there and looked at Aldridge with eyes that had settled completely. Aldridge's hand came back out of his coat with nothing in it. He looked at Samuel for a moment. Samuel did not look away. Aldridge descended the steps. He walked to the edge of the crowd and stopped there. He did not leave. He stood at the edge with the look of a man watching his own trial. Ioka read the 6th name. Then, the 7th. At the 7th name, a sound moved through the crowd. Not words, just a sound. The sound of many people arriving simultaneously at the same understanding. She paused. She looked at the next page. She looked at it for a long moment in the morning light. The square was the quietest it had been since she had started reading. Samuel stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps and looked at her. He could not see her face from where he stood. He saw only her back, the straightness of it. The way she held the paper, he waited. She read the 8th name. It was not his. She folded the page back along its crease. She put the papers in the pouch. She tied the cord. She held the pouch at her side. "Those are the names," she said. "That is the truth. It is yours now." She came down the steps. Clara Webb came up through the crowd to stand beside her. Clara stood there without speaking, her hands at her sides, her face set. It was enough. The standing was enough. The square did not go quiet after that. It went the opposite way entirely. Voices opened up across the crowd the way a dam opens, everywhere at once. Not violence, not yet. But something that could become it, if not handled well. The names on the list were not all strangers. Some of them were neighbors. Some of them were men who had been trusted. Men who had sat at dinner tables. Men who had shaken hands with the husbands of women, now standing in this square. Samuel watched the crowd from the base of the steps and kept his hand near the rifle. He was not watching for one thing. He was watching for the thing that comes first, the small act that gives permission to the larger one. That was what to watch for. Aldridge was still at the edge of the crowd, not moving, his face very controlled. He was watching Ayoka. He was doing his own calculating. Samuel could see it. Two of the men whose names had been read were still in the crowd. One was at the outer edge, moving slowly toward the North Street, trying to be invisible. A group of men had noticed and were tracking him without approaching. Not yet. The other named man had not tried to leave. He stood near the front, head down. He had the look of a man who had already decided what was going to happen to him, and had decided to face it standing up, which was something. Not much, but something. Samuel watched all of this and moved through the crowd carefully. He was not looking for a fight. He was looking for the moment before one. A man came out of the hardware store carrying something. Samuel's hand went to the rifle. It was a ledger. The man set it on the steps of the hardware store and opened it. "I have records," the man said, raising his voice. 3 years of land transactions? I knew some of these deals were wrong. I kept records because I didn't know what else to do. He was a small man, gray at the temples, and his voice shook, but he kept it up. "I'll give these to anyone who needs them, whoever that should be." This was the moment things shifted. Not from chaos to order, from anger to purpose. A woman came forward and said she had letters. A rancher said he had a deed. Each thing added to what Ayoka had begun. Each thing made it harder to bury. Samuel understood then what she had meant about truth spreading. Not like fire, which burns and consumes. Like water, which finds every crack. Which goes everywhere gravity allows. Which does not stop moving. He found Clara Webb at the edge of the activity, watching the square closely. "The judge," Samuel said quietly. Clara looked at Aldridge's position at the edge of the crowd. "I see him. He'll look to burn what's left," Samuel said. "Discredit the papers. Claim forgery. He doesn't need to win the legal argument today," Clara said. "He just needs to delay." "Yes," Samuel said. "There are men in this town who have been wanting to say something for years," Clara said. "They've been waiting for permission." She looked at the ledger man on the hardware steps. She gave them that. "You can't take permission back once it's been given." Samuel looked at the growing activity around the courthouse steps, the ledger, the letters, the deed. The people coming forward, one and then another. "No," he said. "You can't." Aldridge moved. He went not toward the courthouse but toward Samuel, which was unexpected. He came through the crowd with the deliberate calm of a man who has thought this through. He stopped 2 feet from Samuel and looked at him directly, his voice below the crowd. "I know your name is in that pouch," Aldridge said. Samuel kept his face still. "Then you know the same thing I know." "I'm offering you something," Aldridge said. "Hear it before you decide." "Whatever you're offering, I've already decided," Samuel said. "You haven't heard it. I don't need to." He held the judge's eyes. "Step back, Judge. Walk away from this." Aldridge looked at him for a moment. The calculations was visible, running. "Completing, you're choosing a very hard road," Aldridge said. "I know," Samuel said. "I've been on the easy one." "This is better," Aldridge held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he turned and walked away. He walked not toward the courthouse and not toward the street. He walked toward the sheriff's office at the north end of the square. Samuel watched him go. He thought, whatever comes next, it will come through there. It would come through law, or what passed for it in Silver Rock. That was a different kind of fight than a canyon fight. It would take longer, but longer was not the same as losing. He turned back to the square and kept his eyes open for what came next. The day moved through its hours and did not become what Aldridge wanted it to become. 2 deputies came from the sheriff's office and stood at the edge of the crowd. They stood there and watched and did not act, which was its own kind of decision. The ledger man sat on the hardware store steps all morning and showed his records. By midday, 3 other men had brought their own documents to add to the pile. The courthouse steps had become a kind of open table that the town was reading together. Ayoka stood at the center of this for most of the morning, patient and clear. She answered questions when asked, and her answers were simple and without embellishment. She named her mother once, for a woman who asked. She named her father once. She did not editorialize. She did not explain more than was asked. She simply stayed. This was the discipline of someone who had carried something for a long time, who knew that the truth did not need to be dressed up. To be effective, it only needed to be said, clearly and plainly, by someone who was present. Samuel stayed at the perimeter, watching the crowd, watching the sheriff's office. Ellie Turner appeared at noon from the direction of the boarding house. He had eaten, apparently. He looked slightly better than he had in the Ayo. He came and stood beside Samuel without comment and looked at what was happening. Didn't blow up, Eli said. No, Samuel said. Could have, still might. Eli looked at Ayoka on the courthouse steps, then at the crowd around her, then at the ledger man and the documents spreading across the hardware store steps. She knew it would go this way, Eli said. Not a question. Yes, Samuel said. I think she did. Ellie was quiet for a moment. The Apache family, I pointed out to Carver, he said. If they're her kin, I don't expect anything from her about it. I'm not asking, I know, Samuel said. I'm telling you because you should know I know what I did, Eli said. You carrying it is your business, Samuel said. What you do with it is too, Ellie nodded. He looked at his hands briefly the way he had in the Ayo. Then he put them in his pockets and looked at the square. Where does she go after this, he asked. East, Samuel said. Other territories, other people who need to hear it. From someone who was there, Eli said. Yes. Eli thought about this. What about you? Samuel looked at the sheriff's office at the north end of the square. I stay here for a while, he said. There's work to do that doesn't end today. Eli looked at him sidelong. Not going to be comfortable for you. No, Samuel said. Aldridge will use your name the first chance he gets. To discredit all of it, I know. Doesn't scare you? Samuel thought about Abilene. About the blanket he had pulled up. The door he hadn't opened. It should, he said honestly. But I'm tired of being comfortable, Eli. Ellie made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and acknowledgement. Then he straightened his hat. I'm riding at sundown, he said. I figured, Samuel said, not because I'm running. Just because I've got nothing left to offer here, I know, Samuel said. And he did. They stood together for a while and watched Silver Rock begin to reckon with itself. It was not a clean process. It was not a quick one. It would not be over today, but it had begun. And beginning is the thing that everything else depends on. Late afternoon. The crowd in the square had thinned to a committed core. The documents were still spread across the hardware store steps in organized piles. 2 men were writing things down that other men were saying from the crowd. The sheriff had come out once, looked at all of it, and gone back inside. Whether that was good or bad, Samuel could not yet determine. Perhaps neither. Ayoka came down from the courthouse and found Samuel near the water trough. She had the pouch in her hand and she was carrying it differently now, not pressed to her chest. Not hidden, just held, the way you hold something finished. She stood beside him and they both looked at the square for a moment. The ledger man, she said. Did you know he had those records? No, Samuel said. She knew, Ayoka said. My mother. She mentioned him in the letter to me. She said, there was a man in Silver Rock who kept records of the wrong things. She said when the time came he would be ready. She believed that. She was right, Samuel said. Ayoka looked at the pouch in her hand. She believed a lot of things that were true. She was quiet for a moment. The afternoon light came long and golden across the square. Your name, she said. Yes, he said. He did not look at her. He looked at the square. I read it the night before we came into town, she said. When Clara's fire was low and you were sleeping. She paused. I sat with it. I thought about what you told me in the dark. About the blanket. About Abilene. About riding north and not looking back. She paused again. The square moved around them, unhurried, full of people talking. I thought about coming back, she said. turning your horse around in the dark. I thought about the passage where you refused Carver. That wasn't nothing." "No," Samuel said. "But it wasn't enough to balance Abilene either." "No," she agreed. "It is not." He turned to look at her. She was looking at the pouch. "I tore the page," she said. "The one with your name," she said it simply. "The way you say a thing you have made a settled decision about." "I burned it in Clara's stove," she said. "This morning before we came out." He looked at her. She did not look at him. She looked at the square. "Don't waste it," she said. "What I gave back to you." "I won't," he said. She looked at him then, direct, level, without softening it or hardening it. "Coming back doesn't erase Abilene," she said. "It never will, I know," he said. "It only means you're not running anymore," she said. He held her gaze. "I know that too." She looked back at the square. "Then we understand each other," she said. They stood in the afternoon light and watched Silver Rock work through itself. Two people who had come a long way through difficult ground to stand here, neither of them clean, neither of them simple, both of them choosing to stay. The sun dropped fast that evening, the way it always does in the desert. One moment it was gold, then it was red, then it was a deep and wounded purple. Samuel had been riding since before noon, tracking boot prints in a dry creek bed. The prints were fresh that morning but had scattered in the afternoon wind. He was tired. His horse was thirsty. The canteen was running low. He had been following rumors of raiders for 3 days without finding anything solid. He was ready to turn back and admit the trail had gone cold. He crested the ridge above the gulch and pulled the horse to a stop. He looked down into the hollow below and felt his stomach go tight. A woman knelt in the dirt, her wrists tied to a splintered fence post. Her head was bowed, her dark hair hanging forward in the still air. Around her, in a slow and patient half-circle, 7 coyotes moved. Their eyes caught the last light like chips of broken glass. They were not in a hurry. They had learned long ago how to wait. Samuel's hand found the rifle on instinct, his fingers wrapping around it, but he did not raise it. Not immediately. He told himself he was reading the terrain, counting the animals, checking for traps. All of that was true. But there was something heavier underneath it. Something old and familiar that sat in the back of his throat like ash. He had seen something like this before. Different place, different woman, different night, different desert, and he had kept riding. His horse shifted under him, ears pinned forward, uneasy with the smell below. The woman lifted her head. She did not scream. She did not call out for help. She lifted her head and looked at the failing sky with her jaw set. Even from 100 yards above her, Samuel could see the way she held herself, not collapsed into the ropes, braced against them, still deciding whether to give the coyotes. The satisfaction of her fear, Samuel turned his horse north. He rode 20 feet, 30, 40. He could still hear the coyotes below, their low and patient sounds rising. He stopped the horse. He sat there in the last red light of the day, not moving, not breathing deeply. The sound of the coyotes rose slightly, and he knew what that meant. They had decided she was ready. They were moving in. He turned. He pulled the rifle free and fired once into the air above the gulch. The crack of it split the evening open like an axe through dry wood. The coyotes scattered into the scrub, their yelps swallowed by the canyon walls. Samuel spurred the horse down the rocky slope without thinking further about it. The animal picked its way fast over loose rock and dry brush. Dust exploded under each hoofstrike, rising in small pale clouds. He came off the horse before it had fully stopped, knife already in his hand. He crossed the last 20 feet at a run and reached the woman in seconds. He cut the ropes, both of them, in 2 fast strokes. She sagged forward immediately, too weak to hold herself upright any longer. He caught her without deciding to, her weight settling against his chest. Her breath came in shallow and rapid pulls against his collar. He held her up and said the first thing that came into his head. "You're safe now." It was a rough thing to say. Not tender, not certain, just words. She pulled her head back and looked at him directly. Her eyes were dark and sharp, and they held 2 things at once, disbelief and suspicion, living side by side like old neighbors. Samuel lifted her onto his saddle and swung up behind her. The coyotes were already beginning to regroup at the edge of the scrub. He could see their shapes moving in the last of the light, patient again. He turned the horse toward open ground and spurred it into a canter. They rode out of the gulch as the last color left the sky completely. As they rode, Samuel leaned forward slightly, close to her ear. He spoke low, choosing words that were plain and without ornamentation. "You're sleeping with me tonight." It was not a threat. It held nothing beyond what it said: shelter, fire, a rifle between her and whatever came with the dark. He felt her go rigid in front of him the moment the words landed. Then her hand came up, and she was holding something small and thin, blade, short and narrow, pressed flat against his forearm. Not cutting, just present, just making itself known. He did not reach for his gun. He did not pull away or change the horse's pace. He let the animal carry them both at a steady canter across the flats. He waited. The blade stayed against his arm for a long and measured time. The desert rolled past them, dark now, the first stars appearing overhead. Then she lowered the knife, slowly, with deliberate control. Not because she trusted him. She'd not trust him yet, because she was smart enough to know she had no better option, and she was too honest with herself to pretend otherwise. Ly Turner left at sundown, as he had said he would. He took his horse and his pistols and his complicated silences. He rode north without looking back, which was consistent with his character. No farewell, because a farewell would have required an accounting. Ly Turner had always been better at departure than at reckoning, but he had made the shot in the Ayo, with a shaking hand and a half-closed eye. He had made the one shot that mattered, and he had done it when it counted. Samuel did not know what to do with that. He suspected Ly didn't know either. Some things a man carries without knowing quite where to put them down. Maybe Ly would figure it out somewhere north of Silver Rock. Maybe it would ride beside him for the rest of his life. Both were possible. Clara Webb kept a copy of the papers. Ayoka gave them to her before leaving. She sat with Clara at the kitchen table and made copies in Clara's careful hand. It took most of the evening. Samuel sat in the front room and waited. When they were done, Ayoka put the originals back in the tied the cord. Clara put the copies back in box and put it behind the wall board again. "If something happens to me," Ayoka said, "there is a copy here." Clara nodded. She already knew this. She had already decided. "If something happens to both of us," Ayoka said, "there are the men in the square today, the ledger man, the men who are writing things down, the women who came forward with letters. They know now. You can't unknow a thing." Clara looked at the wallboard. "No," she said. "You can't." They sat for a moment longer. "Your mother," Clara said. "She was afraid when she came through here, but she did not act afraid. That was the thing about her." Ayoka looked at the table. "I know," she said softly. "You're the same," Clara said. "That way." Ayoka did not respond to that. But she did not deflect it either. She let it sit where Clara had put it, and it was visible between them for a moment. Then she stood and picked up the pouch and said she needed to rest before morning. Clara showed her to the back room again. She closed the door quietly behind her. In the morning, Ayoka came out before Samuel was fully awake. She was already dressed, already had her horse, ready in the yard behind the boarding house. She had that on the outside of the saddlebag, visible, not hidden. Samuel came out and stood in the yard in the early morning cool. The sky was going from black to gray, to the particular pale gold of desert mornings. The air smelled of mesquite and cold, and the particular clarity of early light. "East," he said. "Yes," she said. She was checking the girth strap, pulling it firm. "There are people in the territory who need to hear this from someone present. Someone who was there when the names were read. Who can answer questions? Who can look at them when she speaks?" She paused. "I am that person." He stood near the gate of the yard with his arms at his sides. He said nothing had she finished. With the saddle, and stood at the horse's head and looked at him. "What Aldridge will try," she said. "You know what he's going to do." "Yes," Samuel said. "He'll use your name, even without the paper. He'll use what people remember. He'll say you were part of it. That this is all the papers are false." "I know," Samuel said. You'll have to stand in front of that and not walk away from it, she said. Yes, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Can you? She said. Not doubting, just asking. He thought about Abilene, the blanket, the door he had not opened. He thought about the ridge above the gulch and the horse he had turned around. He thought about the passage and Carver's offer. And the word he had said, yes, he said. And he meant it in a way he had not meant things in a long time. She nodded, once. Short. The nod of someone who has weighed something and is satisfied. She took the horse's reins and led it to the gate. Samuel opened the gate and stood back. She led the horse through. She mounted, and the horse stood easy under her. She sat for a moment in the morning light and looked at Silver Rock. The main street was empty at this hour. The courthouse at the far end, the hardware store, steps, clear now. The documents, inside, the ledger put away. Apache, the boarding house behind her, Clara's lamp still burning in the kitchen window. She looked at it all the way you look at something you have done. Not with pride, exactly. With the particular satisfaction of a thing completed. Then she looked at Samuel one time. He met her eyes. There was no goodbye in it. No farewell, no promise of return or reunion. There was only the look of two people who have stood in the same difficult place, and who know without saying it that standing there mattered. Then she turned her horse east and rode. Samuel watched until the dust settled, and there was nothing moving in that direction. He stood at the gate of Clara's yard for a long time after she was gone. The sun was coming up, and the town was beginning to wake around him. A door opened somewhere, a child's voice, a horse being taken to water. He looked at the courthouse at the end of the main street. Aldridge would be in there by now, or if not yet, then soon, working on the argument. Working the connections, working the room. He was a patient man and a practiced one, and he had not gotten here by losing. Samuel looked at his hands for a moment, the one wrapped in cloth still. He looked at the courthouse. He picked up his rifle. He walked north along the main street toward the courthouse steps. He did not hurry. He did not slow down. He did not stop. He walked the way a man walks when he has made his peace with whatever comes next. The town was watching him from doorways and windows, the way it had watched him arrive. Quickly. With that particular quality of attention that says something is happening here. Something that deserves to be witnessed. He climbed the courthouse steps and pushed open the heavy door and went inside. The story of what happened in Silver Rock traveled fast. In flat country, stories move the way wind moves. In all directions and unstoppable. By the time it reached the far edges of the territory, it had changed in its telling. Some versions had more outlaws. Some had fewer. Some had a different ending. One version had the cowboy and the Apache woman riding off together into the sunset. That is the version people preferred, because it is the kind of ending that satisfies, that lets you sleep feeling. The world rewards courage with something like happiness. That is not what happened. What happened is this. A woman rode east alone through the desert with names in a leather pouch, names her mother had kept, and she had carried past every reason not to. She spoke those names in places where people believed they had been buried completely, and each time she spoke them, the ground shifted a little under someone's feet. That shifting was not comfortable. It was not clean. It did not resolve in an afternoon. But it was true, and the truth, once spoken plainly, does not ask permission to continue. A man stayed in a town that did not entirely welcome him. He did work that did not pay well and did not stop when it became difficult, which was different from what he had always done before. Not enough to balance Abilene. Nothing would balance Abilene. That was the truth of it. But something. And something is where most things that matter begin. He testified 3 times that dragged across 2 years. He stood in front of rooms full of men who looked at him with various kinds of dislike, and he said what he knew, and he did not walk away while he was saying it. Suck. Aldridge was removed from his position in the first year. 2 of the ranchers whose names have been read faced hearings of their own. The land was not returned. Land rarely is once it has changed hands and built on it, but the record of how it left changed. And records are what time reads. Clara Webb kept the copy in its tin box behind the wallboard. She kept it for 7 years, and then she passed it to the ledgerman for safekeeping. She asked only that he make sure it did not disappear, the way things like this disappear. He said he would. He kept that promise, which is more than can be said for all promises. Ayoka went east, and then north, and then east again. She spoke in settlements and at crossroads, and in the camps of people who needed to hear. She was not always safe doing this. That is the honest thing to say. Some places she came to were not ready to hear. Some people were not ready to listen. She came back anyway, not every time, but enough times. She kept the pouch. The papers inside it grew more worn with each year. She had them copied and the copies copied, so the words would outlast the paper. The names would outlast the men who bore them. Truth works that way. It outlasts the people who made it necessary. It outlasts the people who carried it. It keeps traveling, looking for the place where it can finally land. If you ride east out of Silver Rock in the early morning, when the light is clean and new, you can find the place where the canyon is, the Io where the boulders are stacked and the barricade has long since fallen, where the ground still shows, if you know how to look, the marks of horses and men, where the dust holds the memory of what happened there, the way the desert holds everything, papran permanent, and entirely indifferent to whether you are looking. Out there, in the silence that is not empty, but is full of what has been, if you listen the way Ayoka listened, the way she taught herself to listen at her mother's knee, with your hand flat against the earth, and your breathing slowed, and your attention complete. You can hear something that is not wind and not coyote and not the crack of old stone. You can hear the names she carried, traveling still, on the air, through the canyon passes, over the ridges, past the places where they were first spoken and past the places where they were tried to be buried, looking, as they have always been looking, for the place where they can finally land, where someone will be listening, where someone will be ready, where someone, this time, will not pull the blanket up and go back to sleep. They rode until the stars were thick and cold and fully present overhead. Samuel found shelter in a cluster of mesquite trees near a dry creek bed. The bank was low enough to hide a fire, high enough to see the flats. He helped her down from the saddle, and she caught herself on the horn, one hand pressed against her side where the rope had bitten through clothing. He tied the horse and gathered wood without speaking, moving by habit. Years of lonely nights on the trail had made the motions automatic. He struck a spark and coaxed a flame, feeding it slowly until it held. The fire pushed back the cold that had come down hard with the darkness. The desert at night is a different place than the desert in daylight. In daylight, it is wide and brutal and indifferent to your needs. At night, it is all of that, but it also listens. He pulled the canteen from the saddlebag and held it out to her. She looked at the canteen. She looked at him. She took it. She drank a small and careful amount, then handed it back immediately. "You need more than that," he said. "I take only what I must," she said. Her voice was low, rough with thirst, but steady as standing timber. He crouched beside her and reached for her wrists. She pulled back without hesitation, a quick and practiced withdrawal. "I want to clean the cuts," he said. "You'll scar badly if I don't." She looked at him for a long moment, measuring something. Then she extended her hands, palms up. Like a careful and conditional gift, the rope burns were raw and angry. The skin broken in several places, he dabbed them clean with water from the canteen and worked quietly. He wrapped them in cloth torn from the inside lining of his saddlebag. His fingers moved carefully, and she watched them, rather than his face. She winced once, a small and controlled movement, and made no sound. "You've got grit," he said quietly, not quite meaning to say it aloud. She looked at the fire. "Screaming feeds what hunts you. Silence keeps you alive." The simplicity of it settled on him heavier than he expected it to. He had lived by instinct and by gun and by grit for many years, but he had never thought of silence quite like that. As something tactical, he tied off the last strip of cloth and leaned back on his heels. "What's your name?" he asked. She did not answer immediately. The fire crackled between them softly. Out in the darkness, One coyote called from somewhere far away. Another answered from a different direction, even farther. "Ayoka," she said finally without looking at him. "Samuel Hart." "Folks call me Sam." She looked at the fire. She seemed to consider his name, to weigh it, as though deciding whether it was something worth storing away. He watched her profile in the firelight, the strong line of her jaw, the steadiness in her eyes that had not wavered since he cut her free. She had been through something severe, that much was obvious. But severity had not bent her, it had only revealed what was already there. "Who tied you to that post?" he asked. The fire moved in a small gust of wind. She let it pass before answering. "Men who want what I carry," she said. "What do you carry?" She looked at him then, directly, without deflection, without hurry. "Not enough trust to tell you yet," she said. He nodded. That was fair. More than fair. That was honest. He banked the fire down and settled back against the saddle. The rifle lay across his lap, its weight familiar and comforting. She sat across from him, with her arms wrapped around her own knees. The silence between them was not comfortable, but it was honest, which was more than he could say, for most silences he had shared. Sometime past midnight, the horse stamped hard and tossed its head. Samuel was alert before the sound had finished registering in his ears. His hand found the rifle. His eyes swept the dark beyond the fire. The coyotes had returned. But they were not what troubled the horse. They were at the edge of the scrub, their low shapes barely visible. And they were not looking at Samuel and Ayoka. They were looking at something behind them, something still in the dark. Something that had not moved yet. Something that was deciding then it moved. It came out of the shadows slowly, the way powerful things always move. A mountain lion, enormous, tawny, its coat the color of dry desert grass. Its muscles rolled and shifted under its skin with each deliberate step. It walked to the edge of the firelight and stopped, and it looked at them. Its eyes were the color of old gold, steady, unblinking, and patient. Samuel raised the rifle in one smooth, practiced motion. Ayoka put her hand on his arm. Her grip was firm. "Wait," she said. "That animal is 12 feet from where we're sitting," Samuel said. "I know exactly where it is," she said. "Then you know that I need to wait," she said again. The same word, the same certainty behind it. She rose from the ground slowly, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She stood between Samuel and the mountain lion, fully in the open. Her shoulders were square. Her breathing was even and controlled. She knelt and scooped a handful of dry sand from the creek bed. She let it run through her fingers, slowly, the grains catching firelight. Her lips moved in something that was not quite prayer and not quite song. It was rhythm, a sound shaped like speaking, but aimed at something older. The lion's tail swayed once. Its ears pivoted forward, curious and attentive. Samuel's finger stayed tight against the trigger. His breath held carefully. The lion's muscles gathered, bunching under the skin of its shoulders. Samuel pulled a slow breath in and held it against the back of his throat. Then the animal turned, with a sound low in its chest like a door closing. It walked back into the dark without hurrying, without looking back. In 3 steps it was gone. In 5, the coyotes vanished after it. The clearing held only the fire and the ragged breathing of the horse. Samuel lowered the rifle and looked at her. "What did you say to it?" he asked. She sat back down and pulled the blanket across her shoulders calmly. "I told him there was easier prey elsewhere," she said. She looked at Samuel with something moving in the back of her eyes. Something that was not quite humor but lived in the same neighborhood. "I wasn't lying," she said. Samuel stared at her across the fire for a long and quiet moment. He could not decide if she was the strangest person he had ever encountered, or the most capable. He was beginning to suspect both were true simultaneously. He settled back against the saddle and looked at the dark beyond the fire. He lay awake long after the fire had burned down to red coals. He lay awake thinking about a ridge above a burning house in Abilene, and the sound of a voice he had chosen 3 years ago not to answer. Dawn came in slowly, the color of ash, and then pale gold. Samuel was up before the sun had cleared the ridge to the east. He watered the horse, checked the rifle, checked the horizon. Then he looked at where Ayoka had been sleeping by the fire. She was already awake. She was already working. She crouched at the edge of the creek bed, her fingers moving through the sand. Her head was tilted to one side, her eyes tracking something close to the ground. She moved her fingers carefully, the way a person reads without paper. "What are you reading?" Samuel said, walking toward her. "Tracks," she said. "4 men. They came through in the night." He crouched beside her and looked at the sand where she pointed. He could see the prints now, deep, clear at the edges, very fresh. The edges had not yet softened in the morning wind, hours old at most. He ran his thumb along the outside edge of one boot print deep heel, hard sole, a particular wear pattern on the outside edge. He had seen that pattern before. Not here 3 years ago, in Abilene. He stood up slowly and did not say anything for a moment. He looked east along the creek bed, following the direction of the prints. "We need to move," he said. His voice came out flat and controlled. Ayoka rose and looked at him. She had caught something in his voice. He could feel her watching the side of his face, the way you watch weather. "You know whose boots those are," she said. Not a question, a reading. He checked the cinch on the saddle, pulling it firm. "I know the man. Is he dangerous?" Samuel swung up into the saddle and offered her his hand from above. "He is the most dangerous thing in this desert," Samuel said carefully, "and he does not stop once he has started something." She took his hand and came up behind him in one practiced motion. They rode out of the creek bed at a fast walk, heading west into open ground. The rising sun pushed their combined shadow long across the sand ahead. They rode hard through the morning without speaking much at all. The desert opened around them in every direction, flat and pale and wide. Ayoka sat behind Samuel with her back straight and her chin up. One hand held the back of his coat for balance when the horse moved fast. The other hand she kept pressed flat against her own chest, not against her heart. Against something beneath the fabric of her dress. Samuel noticed this. He had noticed it before dawn, in fact. He did not ask about it. He filed it away and kept watching the ridges. The horse was tired by midday. Samuel pulled it into shade. A sandstone outcropping gave shelter from the climbing sun overhead. He climbed the low face of it on foot to look back the way they had come. The desert stretched flat and bright and empty in every direction behind them. No dust, rocks, no movement on the ridges or along the distant creek bed. But absence of evidence was not the same as evidence of absence. He had learned that lesson the hard way, more than once. In more than one desert, he came back down and sat against the rock in a strip of shade. Ayoka had found shade of her own and sat in it with her eyes closed. She was not asleep. Her breathing was too measured and deliberate for sleep. She was listening to something below the level of ordinary sound. He watched her for a moment, the way you watch something you don't understand. "Tell me about the men who tied you to that post," he said. She opened her eyes.
Looked at him with that level and measuring gaze.
"Tell me about Abilene first," she said. The word hit him in the chest, somewhere between the ribs and the throat. He kept his face still. "How do you know that name?" "I don't," she said. "But when you looked at those boot prints, you changed." She paused. "People only look that way when a place has taken something from them." He was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the sage around them. A hawk turned in a slow circle somewhere high above the rocks. "3 years ago," he said, "I was working with a group of men." He said it. "The way you say things you've carried so long the softness is gone. Tracking bounties. Legal work mostly. But the man who ran the outfit," he stopped, started again. He had other interests alongside the legal work. He was paid to move a family off their land. Apache family, north of here. I knew what the job was. I didn't ride with him that night. Silence. But I didn't stop him either. The hawk above them caught a thermal and rose without moving its wings. I took my share of the payment and rode north. The next morning, I did not look back. Ayoka said nothing. She let the silence hold what he had said. She let it hold it without rushing to fill it or soften it or redirect it. After a while, she asked quietly, "What was the man's name?" "Carver," Samuel said. "His name is Carver." The silence after that was a different kind of silence, heavier. "With more inside it, he is the one following us," she said. "Yes." She nodded once, slowly. Then she reached beneath the neckline of her dress. She pulled out a small pouch of worn leather tied with braided sinew. She held it in both hands with a careful and particular kind of gravity. "This," she said, "is why." She did not open the pouch in the daylight. Not there, in the open. She tucked it back beneath her dress and said only that the time was wrong. Samuel did not push. He had learned in the last 12 hours what pushing meant. Pushing Ayoka toward anything she had not decided was a waste of effort, like pushing against the face of a canyon wall, solid, immovable. Patient, they rode on through the afternoon, tracking west and slightly south. The sun began its descent, and the shadows came back long and useful. The desert floor became a grid of golden dark, shifting with the light. Samuel kept his eyes on the ridges, reading each shadow for movement. He saw nothing, but the feeling between his shoulder blades did not ease. Then he saw the smoke. It rose from the direction of his ranch, thick and black and deliberate. The column bent in the upper winds and spread thin against the pale sky. He did not speak. He spurred the horse into a gallop immediately. Ayoka held tighter to his coat as the horse stretched out beneath them. They covered the ground fast, the ranch getting no better as they closed in. When they crested the last ridge, Samuel pulled the horse hard to a stop. Below them, the cabin's roof had collapsed inward on itself completely. The corral fence was scattered across the yard in pieces and splinters. The small barn still stood on 3 walls, the 4th open to the sky. Ashen boot prints covered the yard in every direction, visible from the ridge. Foles sat on the horse and looked at it for a long and quiet moment. He had built that cabin with his own hands over one long summer. He had built the corral fence the following spring, post by post. He had chosen that particular patch of desert because it had water nearby, because it was defensible, because it was his was. That word settled in his chest like a stone. He swung it down from the saddle and walked into the yard. He walked slowly, the way you walk through something you have lost. He picked up a tin cup from the dirt beside the collapsed porch steps. It was cracked down the middle, split clean, useless now. He set it back down where he had found it. "This place was all I had left," he said. His voice cracked on the last word and he let it. He did not smooth it over. Ayoka had dismounted behind him and walked to the edge of the yard. She crouched near a set of rat tracks and studied them without touching them. 5 men, she said. They were thorough. They searched every room. "I can see that," Samuel said. "They were looking for me," she said. He knew she was right. He had already arrived at the same conclusion. He kicked a charred beam near the collapsed porch and sent sparks scattering. "Damn them," he said. Low, quiet. Not for anyone else. For himself. Ayoka stood and looked across the ruined yard at him. The late light came in from the west and painted her face in copper and ash. "A home can be rebuilt," she said. "You cannot, if rage blinds what comes next." She said it simply, without preaching. Without softening it or hardening it, he turned to face her. He looked at her wrists, still wrapped in his cloth. He thought about the 7 coyotes, the mountain lion, the boot prints. He thought about her holding the knife against his arm in the dark, and letting it drop. Not because she trusted him, because she chose to. He straightened up. "We can't stay. They'll come back to see if I returned." She was already looking east. Her head tilted slightly, listening. "They're near," she said. "The ground still holds the sound of their horses." He dropped to a crouch beside her and pressed one hand flat to the earth. At first he heard nothing then. Faint and growing, hooves on hardpan. Somewhere to the south and east, getting louder. Getting closer. "They're circling back," he said through his teeth. Ayoka's eyes moved to the broken barn. "The walls still stand in part." Samuel was already moving, pulling her toward the shadow of the structure. They pressed into the darkest corner. The horse pulled in behind them. The hoofbeats grew and resolved into voices, rough and unhurried. "Burned it good, didn't we?" A man's voice, carrying on the still air. "Bet he comes back. They always do. Like dogs to their own pen." A third voice, lower and colder, cutting through the others cleanly. "He'll come. And when he does, the girl will be with him." Samuel's knuckles were white against the rifle stock. Every instinct he had told him to step out and end this immediately. He stayed still, outnumbered and exposed and without cover worth the name. From the shadow of the barn wall, they watched 3 riders appear, silhouettes moving against the red sky like something cut from paper. Carver led them, his hat low, his rifle lying easy across his saddle horn. He dismounted and walked the yard with the satisfied look of ownership. "Search the rubble," Carver said. "He's stubborn. He might have left something." The other 2 went through the ashes, kicking and turning debris idly. Carver paced the perimeter slowly, his eyes moving across every corner. He paused at the edge of the barn's shadow and looked toward the wall. Samuel stopped breathing. Carver's gaze held the darkness for a long moment, his hand near his revolver. Then he turned away and spat into the ash. "Nothing here. He'll come to us," beside Samuel. Ioka's lips moved next to his ear. "One word. Patience." Carver mounted. The 3 riders turned and rode back, the way they came. The hoofbeats faded. The desert reclaimed its silence, one layer at a time. Samuel let his breath out and felt the trembling in his arms begin. He turned to Ioka. She was already watching him, with those steady eyes. "They'll hunt us until one of them is dead," he said. "You know that?" "Yes," she said. "Then we stop running and we choose the ground." Before she could answer, a sound came from the far side of the broken wall. Not hooves, not wind. The deliberate snap of a branch under human weight. Then Samuel raised the rifle. Ioka went still beside him. From the darkness behind the ruined barn, a voice came, careful and slow. "Easy, Heart. I'm not here to shoot you. Hands are open. Look for yourselves." A figure stepped around the corner, with both palms raised and visible. Lean, weathered, a beard going gray at the chin. A rifle on his back, not in his hands. He moved with the careful patience of a man who had survived by moving slowly. Samuel kept the rifle on him. His jaw was tight. "Eli Turner," Samuel said. The man's face, creased as old leather, produced a tired and cautious smile. "I heard you were having trouble," Eli Turner said. Figured the stories were true. His eyes moved to Ioka, and they moved over her with careful attention. "Reckon they are," he said. Samuel did not lower the rifle. "Give me one reason I shouldn't shoot you right now." Ellie held his hand steady. "Because I know things you don't yet know." He paused. "And because Carver's men are blocking the road south of here. You ride that direction, you'll be dead before sundown tomorrow." Samuel looked at him for a long moment. Ioka said nothing at all. The fire from the ruined cabin was dying behind them, going to red coals. The stars were coming out overhead one at a time, then all at once. Samuel lowered the rifle a few inches, but not all the way. "Not yet, Talk," he said. "But stay where I can see your hands while you do it." They sat in the broken shade of the barn's remaining wall and listened to Samuel. Kept the rifle across his knees with his near the trigger guard. Ellie Turner talked the way men talk when they are trying to be believed, carefully, with pauses in the right places, with details that checked out. He had ridden with Carver's outfit, he said. Not now, but not long ago. Long enough to know how the man thought and how the man worked. Carver had been hired to retrieve something. He wouldn't say exactly what, but he knew it was worth more to certain men than burning ranches down. Worth more than trouble with law. Worth more than men getting killed. Worth enough to bring Carver himself instead of sending someone cheaper. "Whatever she's carrying," Eli said, nodding toward Ioka, "has powerful mentation scared." Ioka said nothing. Her face gave away nothing. Her hands were still. "He'll drive you east," Eli continued. "Cut the south road first, then east. Push you toward the dry country where the water holes have all gone. Starve you out. Wait until you're too thirsty and too tired to resist." He's patient like that. He prefers suffering to speed. Always has. Samuel listened to this and recognized it as accurate. That was Carver's way. Not cruelty for its own sake. Cruelty as a method. As a preferred tool. "What do you get out of helping us?" Samuel asked. Eli's grin thinned down to something less like humor and more like calculation. "Same thing I always want," he said. "To keep drawing breath a while longer." He looked at his own hands a moment. "Carver has debts I owe him. I'd rather burn him down than spend the rest of my short life paying interest." Ioka's voice came from across the fire, quiet and precisely placed. "A man who fears another man more than death will betray you. When fear returns, Ellie looked at her directly for the first time. He did not smirk this time. "She's not wrong," he said simply. "But your options right now are limited." They ate from Samuel's saddlebag in the shelter of the ruined corral. Jerky and hard bread, eaten without pleasure, swallowed for fuel only. Ellie found a water seep he knew behind what was left of the barn foundation. They filled the canteen, and the horse drank, and everyone felt slightly less desperate. Ellie fell asleep early, or appeared to, his hat tipped over his face. His breathing went long and regular with suspicious. Samuel sat watch. The rifle lay across his lap, familiar as his own heartbeat. The fire burned low, and the stars overhead went very bright and very close. After a while, Ayoka moved slightly closer to him. Not close. Just closer. She reached inside her dress and brought out the leather pouch again. She held it on her knees, her hands resting on the worn leather, lightly. The firelight moved across her face in slow and shifting patterns. "My mother gave me this," she said, 7 years ago. I was 16 years old. Samuel watched her. He did not rush it or fill the space with words. She called me to her in the night, when my father was away from camp. She wrapped this in a piece of cloth and placed it in my hands carefully. She said, "When you are strong enough," only those 4 words. Nothing more. Ayoka's voice was steady, but something beneath the steadiness was not. Then she walked out through the door. She walked into the dark alone. We looked for her. 2 days, then 3. We never found her. The fire crackled once, softly, and went back to its low and steady burning. "I carried this pouch for 7 years without opening it," she said. "I believed that if I opened it before I was truly ready, I would misuse it. I would do something with it that my mother would not have wanted done. Something driven by grief instead of truth. Revenge instead of clarity." She looked at the pouch resting on her knees. Her fingers were very still. "What made you finally open it?" Samuel asked. She paused before answering, giving the question the weight it deserved. "The night they tied me to that post, and the coyotes came," she said. I believed I would not survive until morning. And I thought, if I die tonight, I want to know what she trusted me with. I want to know what was worth her walking out that door and not coming back." She untied the braided cord and opened the pouch and removed several papers. Their edges had gone yellow with age, and their folds were deep and permanent. She unfolded them carefully and held the first one toward the firelight. Names, signatures, dates, amounts of money, names of parcels of land. The language of business and law applied to the business of taking things. Samuel leaned forward. His eyes moved down the first page slowly. Ranchers' names he recognized, a soldier's mark, stamped and initialed. A judge's seal pressed into the lower corner with official indifference. He moved to the second page. More names, more dates, more amounts. He moved to the third page. Near the bottom, 8th line from the foot of the page, a signature in handwriting. He recognized not because he'd seen it often. He recognized it because it was his own, from 7 years ago. His name, written with his own hand, in ink he had used. On a document he had been told was a routine survey agreement. He had been paid $40 for his signature as a witness. He had not asked what he was witnessing. He had not asked what the money was for. He had not let himself ask. He folded the paper back along its crease and handed it to her. His hands were steady. His face was still. His voice when he spoke was flat. "Keep it safe," he said. She looked at him for a long moment across the dim light of the fire. He met her eyes and held them, and he did not look away, and she did not. Something passed between them that was not spoken, and did not need to be. She put the paper clips back in the pouch and tied the cord carefully. She lay down near the fire, with the pouch pressed against her chest. In a few minutes, her breathing slowed toward sleep. Samuel sat awake for a long time after that. He thought about $40. And what $40 was able to buy. He thought about a family north of Abilene and what their land was worth. He thought about a woman walking out a door in the night with something important. He thought about how a man can refuse to ask questions long enough that the not asking becomes its own answer, its own choice. The fire went down to coals. The stars did not move, because stars never do. He was still sitting there when Eli stirred. The hat came up from the face. The older man looked at Samuel across the dying coals with eyes that had not slept. "You were thinking about Abilene," Eli said. "Go back to sleep, Turner." Ellie was quiet for a moment. Then, quietly, "She know about your name in there?" Samuel said nothing, which was its own answer. Eli accepted it as such. "Carver already knows," Eli said, keeping his voice below a whisper. "That's why he won't stop. That's why it has to end one way or the other." He pulled his hat back down. "Sleep, Hart. Tomorrow is going to be long." Samuel looked at the closed face of the sleeping pouch across the dark. He did not sleep. The stars moved overhead the way they always do, tolerant and cold and entirely indifferent to what happens below them. They broke camp before the sky had gone from black to gray, Lee's suggestion, and it was a sound one. Ride west, not south or east. Carver would expect south, toward Silver Rock, or east toward open ground. West bought them time, maybe half a day, maybe less. But something. They rode in single file through the early dark, Samuel leading Ayoka behind him on a second horse that Eli had brought and did not explain. Eli at the rear, hat low, eyes moving across the ridges with practiced caution. Nobody spoke in the first hour. There was nothing useful left to say yet. The desert at pre-dawn is its own particular country. The cold comes down hard, and the darkness has texture, and the silence is full. It is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of everything. Samuel rode through it with his ears open and his mind working. He thought about the approach to Silver Rock from the west. He thought about the roads Carver would have covered by now. He thought about 6 men, or 8, or 10, spread across the approaches. And he thought about the third page of the papers in Ayoka's pouch, his name. 8th line from the bottom, $40. No questions asked. 7 years of not looking back. They were picking their way along a game trail above a narrow canyon. The sun had been up for 2 hours, and the light was hard and direct. Samuel saw the reflection first. A flash on the far ridge. Metal-catching sun, there for half a second. Then gone. Then there again, from a different angle. He pulled the horse into cover, behind a shoulder of rock without a word. Ayoka's horse came in beside him before he gestured. She had already seen it. 2 riders on the far ridge, she said quietly. One in the canyon below. Ellie came in behind them. His horse pressed close to the rock face, flanking. He looked at the canyon ahead, with the expression of someone doing arithmetic. "There will be more behind us within the hour," he said. "They've been waiting." Samuel looked at the terrain. One way through. One way back. Neither good. "There's passage through the canyon wall," Ayoka said. "Narrow but clear. My people used it when soldiers came. They won't know it exists." "How do you know this part of the territory?" Samuel asked. "I was born 2 days' ride east of here," she said. Simply, without emotion, and I paid close attention to everything while I was growing up. Ellie shook his head. "Passage narrow enough to lose pursuit has its own dangers. You can be boxed from both ends just as well as from above. Then we move before they think to cover it," Samuel said. They dismounted and led the horses in single file into the crack in the rock. Samuel first, rifle in his right hand and the reins in his left. Ayoka behind him, her horse following with better calm than his own. Eli at the rear, pistol in hand, watching the way they had come. The passage was 4 feet wide at its broadest, narrower in several places. The rock on either side was cold and damp even in the morning heat. It smelled of mineral water and old shade and something older than both. They were halfway through when Samuel heard the sound, spurs. Metal on stone, slow, deliberate, and coming from ahead of them. He stopped and raised his hand. Everyone behind him went still. The sound came again, closer. The particular ring of iron on hard canyon rock. A silhouette appeared at the far end of the passage, filling most of it. Tall, broad, hat low, rifle across the chest with an air of complete ease. The figure stepped into the thin strip of light, falling through the crack above. Samuel knew the shape before the face was visible. You know a man by his shape. If you have ridden long enough beside him, his silhouette becomes memory. "Carver," Samuel said. The figure smiled. "Yellow. Teeth. Pale, flat eyes the color of water over clay. Heart," Carver said. His voice was easy, almost warm. "Took you long enough." His eyes moved past Samuel to Ioka, and they settled on her with weight. The weight of a man looking at something he has already decided belongs to him. "There she is," Carver said. "Been a while. You look well enough, considering." "Step aside," Samuel said. Carver made a small sound that lived in the space between a sigh and a laugh. "You know I can't do that, Hart. Boys on the ridge are waiting on my word. Boys in the canyon bottom are waiting too. Patient men, all of them. I told them to hold until I gave the signal." "You know how men get. I know how you are," Samuel said. "That's different from knowing how men are." Carver's expression shifted. "Not much, but enough catch. Does she know?" He nodded slightly toward Ioka, dropping his voice to something smoother. "Does she know who she's riding beside? What you signed? What you collected?" He tilted his head. "What you chose not to do in Abilene when it mattered." The passage held those words for a moment the way rock holds heat. Samuel did not move, did not answer, did not look at Ioka beside him. "Tell her," Carver said. "Go on, Hart. Tell her about the survey agreement. Tell her about the $40. Tell her about the night in that boarding house. The night you heard the shots and pulled the blanket up and went back to sleep." The passage was very quiet, very still. The horses stood without moving. "Step aside," Samuel said. His voice had not changed. "Or what?" Carver took one step forward. His tone went easy and pleasant. "You shoot me in this passage, the horses break. Your men hear it from above. You've thought it through, Hart. You always think things through carefully, and then you do exactly nothing. That's always been your particular problem." He looked at Ioka directly. "What has he told you about Abilene?" Ioka looked back at him without flinching. She said nothing. "Ask him," Carver said. "Ask him what he knew and what he chose to do." "Tell her," he said to Samuel again. "Let's get everything in the open," Samuel said. "I'm going to make you a promise, Carver. Not an offer, a promise. You step aside right now. I let you walk back to your men. No more than that. You take one more step forward, and this conversation ends a different way." Carver smiled wider, stepped forward. One step. Deliberate. Testing. Eli fired from behind Samuel's left shoulder. The shot hit the wall beside Carver. The sound in that narrow space was enormous, like the rock itself cracking. Stone fragments cut Carver's cheek. His hat knocked sideways. He flinched back. "Next one," Eli said from behind. "Doesn't go into the wall." Carver steadied himself. He touched the blood on his cheek with 2 fingers. He looked at the blood on his fingers. Then he looked at Samuel. Something moved behind the pale eyes. Something that had not been there before. Not fear. Something more complicated than fear. Something like recalibration. "Canyon Fork," he said. His voice had gone quiet and very even and cold. "I'll be there at sundown with more men than you have ammunition for. Think on the offer I made you, Hart. Your name burns with everything else." He turned and walked back through the passage without hurrying, without rushing him. Spurs rang on the stone with each step, getting quieter, then gone. They waited until the sound had faded completely before anyone breathed. Eli said quietly, "We cannot go to the canyon fork, I know," Samuel said, "and we cannot outrun him west. He'll have the ridges covered by now. I know that too." Ioka's voice came from beside his left shoulder, close and certain when we reach Silver Rock. "There are 8 names in this pouch." Samuel kept his eyes on the end of the passage. 8 names. "Yes," she said. "I need you to be ready for every one of them." He turned to look at her. In the narrow dark of the passage, her face was calm. "All 8, he said. He needed to hear her say it directly. She looked at him steadily. "All 8, she said. He understood what she was saying. And he did not argue against it. He turned back to the passage and led the horse toward open ground. They came out of the passage into a wider canyon and rode south and fast. Ioka navigated from memory, calling directions at each fork and wash. She moved through this landscape with the certainty of someone reading home. Every ridge and dry creek bed was known to her. Every shadow had a name. Eli rode alongside Samuel after an hour, keeping his voice well below a carry. "You know what is in that pouch," Eli said, not asking, telling. "I know part of it," Samuel said. "Your name is in there." Samuel said nothing. The horse's hooves struck the hard pan in steady rhythm. "And you're still riding with her toward Silver Rock," Eli said. Yes, a pause. Eli watched the middle distance. Most men wouldn't. I know, Samuel said, another pause. The kind where a man is building towards something. What happened in Abilene, Hart? The whole of it. What you haven't said. Samuel watched the ground ahead. The conversation had been coming for a while. He had felt it coming since the moment Eli Turner walked out of the barn shadow. A family wouldn't move, Samuel said. They had land and they wouldn't sell it. Carver was hired to handle the situation. I was cutting away from that outfit, but I was still close enough to the operation to know what the job was. He told me the night before he went out there, told me what he planned. I didn't ride with him. He paused. I didn't stop him either. I took my last payment and rode north before the sun was up the next morning. I told myself it was not my business anymore, that I was already gone. He stopped talking. The horse moved under him. The sun moved overhead. Whose family? Eli said after a while. The silence stretched long enough to become its own answer. I don't know, Samuel said finally. And then, quieter, in a voice with less air in it, I never asked. Ellis was quiet for a considerable time after that. Then, there was a woman, Apache. She had a child with her that night. They said the woman got out before the fire took the house completely, but they never found her after. She just wasn't there anymore. Samuel kept his eyes on the land ahead, flat, bright, merciless and wide. That right, he said, not a question. A word placed carefully, that's what I heard, Eli said. Ahead of them, Ioka was riding with her back straight and her chin up. The desert opened before her, and she moved through it without hesitation. Sanswold watched her and thought about a woman walking out a door at night, carrying something important, walking into the dark, not coming back. He thought about a 16-year-old girl waiting years to be strong enough, he thought, about $40 and what Fortas had actually bought. He thought about his own name, written in his own hand on the third page, and he kept writing. They stopped at dusk in a shallow depression, ringed by boulders. It offered cover on three sides and a clear view to the south and east. Not ideal, but the best available. The desert did not offer many good choices. Eli unsaddled the horses and gave them the last of the water from the canteen. Samuel built a fire low and small, the kind that does not carry far. Ioka gathered the horses' reins and tied them to a mesquite root. She worked quickly despite the rawness of her wrists and the stiffness in her. They ate the last of the jerky and sat with the silence between them. After a while, Ioka opened the pouch and laid the papers on a flat stone. She went through them one at a time, explaining each one in a quiet voice. Names of ranchers who had signed agreements they had no legal right to sign. Names of soldiers who had received payment for looking the other way. Names of judges who had made rulings they had been paid in advance to make. And, on the third page, near the bottom, her father's name, Chiais, written in an unsteady hand. The signature of a man underweight. He sold you, Samuel said. He chose the words as carefully as he could. He owed debts, she said. And men who work like Carver know how to use debts. She looked at her father's signature, without expression, without softness. My mother wrote that he was threatened directly, that they came to him clearly, told him his family would be destroyed completely if he refused to sign. She paused. Her finger rested on his name but did not press against it. My mother also wrote that fear is not the same as evil. By itself, it is not. But silence that is fed by fear is something else entirely. A different thing. She folded the page and placed back with the others, carefully, in order. She left the truth for me to carry, she said. Not to protect him from it, not to punish him with it. To ensure that it did not stay buried forever, she tied the cord and held the pouch in her hands for a moment. In silver, rock, Samuel said slowly, when you stand up and read those names. Yes, she said. All of them, he said. She looked at him. Her eyes were clear and without evasion. All of them, she said. He held her gaze. Are you asking me to leave mine out? He watched her face while she considered it. She did not look away. No, she said. And her voice was quiet, but it did not waver. I haven't decided yet, she said. But I'm not asking you to hide from it, he nodded. He looked at the fire for a moment, then back at her. That's fair, he said. Eli was awake somewhere behind them. Samuel could tell by the quality of the silence. Eli's sleeping silence and Eli's listening silence were different in a way he knew. He had ridden with men like Eli long enough to know the difference clearly. He did not address it directly. He let it sit where it was, the fire. Burned down. The stars came out overhead, thick and very bright. Samuel took first watch, settled against a boulder with the rifle across his knees. After a while, with Ioka's breathing gone slow and even beside the fire, "She's something," Eli said from the other side of the fire, quietly. Samuel said nothing. "I mean that straight." "Not the other way." Eli paused. "What are you going to do?" "About what specifically?" Samuel said. "About Silver Rock. About walking into a town with names in a pouch. Names that include men with law in their pockets and judges in their employ. You walk in there, with that, they might hang you before she reads the first name." "Then I hang," Samuel said. "But the truth doesn't." Ellie was quiet. The fire cracked once and went back to its low and steady burn. "I pointed a family out to Carver once," Eli said. From nowhere. Quietly, Samuel went still. 3 years back. Apache family, north of here. Maybe a day's ride. Eli paused. "He asked me if I knew anyone who wouldn't move without encouragement. I told him about that family. I'd seen them. Seemed settled. Seemed stubborn. They burned that night." Samuel said nothing. His hands were still on the rifle. Eli's voice was even and controlled. But it was controlled the way a lid is controlled. Something underneath, pressing upward against the weight above. "I don't know," Eli said. If that was her kin, he said it to the fire, not to Samuel. Not to anyone, really. Just to the air. Samuel looked at Ioka's sleeping form across the low and dying fire. The pouch was against her chest, rising and falling with her breath. He said nothing. There was nothing to say that would change what had happened. There was only what came next, and whether you showed up for it or didn't. He watched the dark. He held the rifle. He let the night pass.